UASIs are urban area strategic initiatives. And what that actually means is they're a gathering of public safety and security officials from all over a metropolitan area, and they join together essentially to decide who gets Homeland Security funds that are being funneled to metropolitan areas. So UASIs are basically a conglomeration of all of the public safety and Homeland Security professionals from a given area, dividing up the spoils of the national security state on a local and regional level. They essentially have been starting to spring up around 4 or 5 years after 9/11. The Department of Homeland Security, of course, created this entire sort of secondary military establishment in the U.S., and then it became a question of how that what's the word, megapoly, how that huge thing worked with local and state governments. And what's happened now, because of the large amount of money that's flowing through Homeland Security, is that essentially these quasi-bodies have been set up as arms of Homeland Security all over the country. And we are up now to dozens and dozens of UASIs, and essentially nobody knows that they're there. What's confusing and upsetting about UASIs, at least that's what I found when I went to a meeting of the Bay Area UASI, was the total blurring of the lines between what we would call emergency services, public health services, things that would happen if there's an earthquake, if there's a tsunami, if there's an outbreak of an illness that's wildly contagious. Totally intermixed or interseamed with the idea of sort of blanket surveillance of basically the entire population of the area, and with what really seemed kind of overreaching and invasive privacy violations. And there didn't seem to be, for most of the people in the room, any division between these two things, or any idea that in fact an act of terrorism or violence was not the same as an earthquake. So when we talk about spying on everyone who lives in an area as if it's the same kind of thing as reinforcing our house from an earthquake, I think we've kind of wandered into some territory that isn't completely clear. What we also see from increased county and city cooperations is an emphasis on fusion centers, which are essentially intelligence gathering operations that are pulling data from a huge variety of sources and essentially putting it all together so that our activities, our emails, our travels essentially can be sorted through multiple databases in the same place across a wide variety of regions. And what this does is it essentially increases the amount of data that's available to any particular agency beyond what it needs for its own purposes, and essentially puts them all together so very complete portraits can be drawn of what people are doing and saying and thinking. And for people that are living in vulnerable or marginalized positions, that can be very scary. For people with criminal records, it's scary. For people that are engaged in legal protest activities, it's scary. Well, the fusion centers draw from a number of different databases. They access the automated license plate readers that are being installed in numerous cities. They get Stingray information from law enforcement. They get DEA Sting information. They have access to medical records. They have access to educational records. So in other words, all of these items are essentially poured into the Fusion Center. And then, Edward Snowden talked about this a bit on the federal level. When you have multiple streams coming in, it's really just a question of, can you cross-reference? In other words, can you put in a person's name and pull out multiple references across databases, both geographically and by subject type? And if you can, in fact, do that, then you get a substantial amount of information about an individual. So the question is, why are we doing all of this? And I think that the safe answer is because the point is to have the data And why would you want to have all of that data? I think it comes back to increased social control, because the population that is watched and that is surveilled is a population that is more easily controlled. And that goes back in the government to the days of J. Edgar Hoover, who had a dossier on just about everybody and a lot of power as a result.